My son tried to take power of attorney, but my late husband's secret codicil turned the table on him. At my granddaughter's engagement party, I picked up my name card and froze. In bold, elegant letters, it didn't say Margaret Collins. It didn't even say Grandma. No, it read, "The lady covering the bills." Just 6 words, but they felt like a slap in the face in a room full of smiling relatives. I'm glad you're here. Please stay with me until the end of this story, because I want you to see what happens when someone finally decides they're done being taken for granted. And if you don't mind, let me know the city you're watching from. It means the world to me to know how far these words can reach. I've always believed that family milestones, weddings, birthdays, even small Sunday dinners are supposed to be celebrations of love, not transactions. That night, standing in the grand ballroom of the Marriott Hotel in downtown Portland, I realized my family saw me as little more than a walking checkbook. To be honest, I should have noticed the signs long before that evening. I'm 68 years old, a widow of almost a decade now. My late husband Henry worked 35 years as a firefighter. I spent my life as a nurse, working night shifts and double shifts, socking away every penny so we could retire in peace. When Henry passed suddenly from a stroke, everyone said, "At least he left you secure." Secure. That word followed me like a shadow. Secure meant comfortable for me, but apparently it also meant convenient for everyone else. Still, I'd been looking forward to this party. My granddaughter Emily had always been the light in my life. She used to spend summers with me baking blueberry pies and planting tomatoes in the backyard garden. I thought this engagement would be my chance to see the family smile together again, to feel like Henry was with us in spirit, proud of the generations that came after him. But when the young woman at the check-in table handed me that name card, her cheerful expression faded the moment she saw my face fall. Is something wrong, ma'am?" she asked, tilting her head like she already knew the answer. I swallowed hard, forcing a polite smile. "No, dear. Everything's fine." I pinned the card to my dress and walked in, pretending not to hear the low chuckles behind me. My heart beat so loud I could barely register the soft jazz playing from the live band near the stage. That's the thing about humiliation. It doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, makes your hands shake as you hold a glass of champagne, makes you wonder if everyone is staring at you, whispering behind your back. As I walked deeper into the ballroom, the details blurred: the twinkling string lights, the clinking glasses, the smell of roast beef carving stations. But what I couldn't shake were the words etched on that name tag. Words that told me more than my son Daniel or his wife Karen had ever dared to say out loud. The lady covering the bills. And you know what? It wasn't the first time. Over the past few years, there had been little comments, Daniel joking at Thanksgiving that Mom's credit card has no limit, Karen laughing that I should be thankful to have something useful to do in retirement. I brushed it off because families tease, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't teasing. It was truth slipping through cracks of careless words. At that party, though, the mask slipped off completely. A simple name card reduced me from Margaret Collins, mother, grandmother, nurse, widow woman, to a line item on someone's financial spreadsheet. I glanced at the head table where Daniel and Karen sat, both sipping wine, laughing with Emily and her fiancé. Daniel caught my eye and gave me a quick wave, as if nothing was wrong. As if he hadn't just stamped a label on his own mother in front of the entire extended family. I thought about Henry then. I could almost hear his voice, steady, warm, protective. "Maggie," he used to say, "never let anyone forget who you are. You're not just what you can give. You're everything." And for the first time in years, I felt a pang of anger stronger than grief. Because if Henry had been alive, none of this would have happened. He would have stood tall and silenced anyone who dared to mock me. But he wasn't there. It was just me, alone, pinned under a label, I never asked for. So I straightened my back, adjusted the little gold chain around my neck, the one Henry gave me on our 30th anniversary, and I decided right then this was the beginning of something. I didn't know what yet, but I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. The longer I stood in that ballroom, the heavier that name tag felt on my chest. At first, I thought maybe no one had noticed. Maybe it was just an inside joke, a slip. But then I caught the whispers. 2 women standing by the dessert table glanced in my direction, their manicured hands cupped over crystal flutes. "That's her," one of them murmured, stifling a laugh. Karen said she basically bankrolled the whole event. My stomach turned. I set my champagne glass down, untouched. A few minutes later, I overheard something sharper. Daniel's voice low, but careless. He was speaking to one of his business colleagues, a man in a tailored navy suit. "Yeah, my mom's comfortable. Dad left her everything. Honestly, she doesn't have much else going on, so she's happy to help. It keeps her busy, you know. Keeps me busy, as if my life's worth was measured by how many checks I could sign." The man shifted uncomfortably, glancing at me. For a split second, I thought he might say something in my defense, but he didn't. He just sipped his drink, nodded, and followed Daniel's lead. That silence hurt almost as much as the words themselves. I wanted to disappear, to take off that humiliating label and run. But Emily was standing at the head table, radiant in her white dress, her smile wide and genuine. This was her night, and I refused to ruin it by creating a scene. So I smiled through clenched teeth, nodding politely to relatives, pretending not to hear the laughter that followed me like an echo. But then came the toast. Karen rose gracefully, clinking her glass. Her voice rang clear through the microphone. "We want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate Emily and James, and of course, we have to give a very special thank you to the woman who made all of this possible, my wonderful mother-in-law, Margaret. Or as we like to call her," she paused, her lips curling into a smile, "our family's CFO, Chief Funding Officer." The crowd chuckled. Some laughed outright. Daniel even slapped the table, grinning ear to ear. I felt the blood rush to my face. Every muscle in my body screamed at me to stand up, to shout, to demand an ounce of respect. Instead, I sat frozen, my hands trembling under the tablecloth. Emily's smile faltered. She glanced at me almost apologetically, but she didn't say a word. In that moment, I realized something brutal. It wasn't just Daniel or Karen. It was the silence from everyone else, the complicity of laughter, the choice not to defend me. That was the real betrayal. When the toast ended, I excused myself and slipped into the hotel restroom. The mirror showed me a woman I barely recognized. Eyes glistening, makeup, smudged shoulders sagging under invisible weight. I locked myself in a stall, pulled the name tag off my dress, and clenched it in my fist until the paper tore. I thought of Henry again, how he used to call me his anchor, how he said I was the reason he could face every fire, every risk, because he knew he had a home to come back to. And now here I was, reduced to a joke at my own granddaughter's engagement party. I cried, silently, pressing a tissue to my lips so no one would hear. For the first time in years, I wished Henry had left less money. Maybe then they would have loved me for me, not for what I could give. A knock on the restroom door startled me. A soft voice called, "Mrs. Collins." "Are you all right?" It was a hotel staff member, a young man in a crisp uniform. I opened the door slightly, wiping my eyes. "I'm fine, thank you." He hesitated, then said, "I just wanted to say, my grandmother raised me after my parents left. If anyone ever disrespected her like that, I'd never forgive myself. You deserve better, ma'am." The kindness of a stranger undid me. I nodded, whispered a thank you, and returned to the ballroom with my head held just a little higher. But inside, I was shattered. By the end of the night, I had written another check, $45,000, to cover the catering bill Daniel had insisted was urgent. I signed it with a steady hand, but my heart was in pieces. That night, alone in my bedroom, I placed the ripped name tag on my nightstand. The words still mocked me, even torn. The lady covering the bills. I realized then this wasn't a one-time joke. This was how they truly saw me. And unless I did something, it would never stop. The morning after the engagement party, I sat at my kitchen table in my little craftsman-style home on the east side of Portland. Sunlight spilled across the linoleum floor, but I couldn't feel its warmth. In front of me lay the ripped name tag smoothed out as best as I could, mocking me with its bold letters. The lady covering the bills. I stirred my coffee absent-mindedly, the spoon clinking against the mug. Sleep hadn't come easy. Every laugh, every whisper from the night before replayed in my head. And then that toast chief funding officer. My jaw clenched, just remembering it. For years I had told myself their little requests were harmless. A helping hand for Daniel's new SUV, tuition for Emily's private college. A kitchen remodel Karen insisted would increase their home's resale value. Each time I convinced myself it was normal. That's what families did, help each other. But last night stripped away the illusion. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as leverage, a safety net, a pocketbook that never said no. And for the first time in my life, I wanted to say no. I was still lost in thought when the doorbell rang. Standing there was a man I hadn't seen in years. Mr. Blake, our old family attorney. He was in his 70s now, white hair combed neatly, leather briefcase in hand. "Mrs. Collins," he greeted softly. "Henry asked me to check in on you from time to time. After what I witnessed last night, I thought this might be the time." I blinked in surprise. "You were there?" He nodded gravely. "Yes. I heard the toast. Henry would have been furious." He set his briefcase on my dining table, opened it, and pulled out a sealed envelope. "There's something Henry left with me, a codicil to his will. He made me promise not to share it unless he felt you were being mistreated. I think that moment has arrived." With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. The language was legal and stiff, but the meaning was crystal clear. Any descendant who humiliates Margaret publicly or attempts to coerce her into relinquishing her home or finances shall forfeit their inheritance. I set the papers down slowly, my heart pounding. Henry had known. He had seen what I refused to admit, that Daniel and Karen's entitlement would only grow. And he'd built a safeguard for me. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. Mr. Blake's eyes softened. "He wanted them to treat you right because they loved you, not because they feared losing money. He hoped this would never be needed." For a long moment, I stared at the envelope. I could almost hear Henry's voice again, steady, protective. "Maggie, don't ever let them forget who you are." A strange calm washed over me. The humiliation from last night hadn't vanished, but it was no longer the end of the story. It was the beginning. "So what now?" I asked quietly. Mr. Blake closed the briefcase. "That's up to you. You could enforce it today, but sometimes it's wise to wait, to see who they really are when they think no one is watching." And that's when I decided I wouldn't rush. I would let Daniel and Karen keep digging their own grave. I would stand by silently, collecting every word, every action. And when the time came, their own behavior would condemn them far louder than I ever could. That afternoon, I pulled out old check registers and bank statements, spread them across my living room floor. The numbers told a painful truth. In the last 5 years, I had given my son and his wife nearly $250,000. Vacations, cars, remodels, college tuition, all disguised as help. I whispered into the empty room, "No more." Later that week, as if on cue, Daniel called. His voice was syrupy sweet the way it always was when he wanted something. "Mom, we've been thinking. That old house must be getting hard to manage. What if we help you downsize? You'd be safer in a retirement community and we could, well, keep the place in the family." My grip tightened on the phone. Retirement community. Translation: sell my home, hand them the money. But instead of snapping, I simply said, "Let me think about it, Daniel." Because now I had a plan. That night, Ethan, my grandson, Daniel's younger son, showed up at my door. He was 22 tall and lanky with Henry's kind eyes. He shifted nervously on the porch, hands stuffed in his hoodie. "Grandma," he said softly, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry about the other night. The name tag, the toast. It wasn't right." Tears welled in my eyes. I let him in, poured us tea, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where Henry and I had planned our future decades ago. Ethan looked down at his mug. "Dad and Mom? They've been talking about selling your house? They think it's too big for you alone?" "I don't like it. It feels wrong." I studied his face, searching for any sign of manipulation. But all I saw was sincerity. For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart," I said. "It means more than you know." That night, after Ethan left, I stood in the quiet of my living room, the codicil still on the table. My humiliation had birthed something new: resolve. For years, I had been their safety net, their silent benefactor. But now, with Henry's words echoing in my ears and Ethan's kindness reminding me not all was lost, I knew one thing for certain: I would not go down quietly. The days that followed felt like a chess game I hadn't agreed to play. Daniel and Karen moved their pieces carefully, as if I wouldn't notice. But I noticed everything now. First, it was the casual comments. Karen would call in the mornings, her tone syrupy sweet. "Margaret, dear, how's your blood pressure these days? You shouldn't be stressing yourself in that big old house. It must be exhausting." Then Daniel chimed in during Sunday dinner at their place. "Mom, you shouldn't be driving at night anymore. What if something happened? A smaller place closer to us would be so much safer." They dressed it up as concern, but underneath it was clear they wanted my home. I kept my responses short. "I'm fine, thank you," or "I'll think about it." And every time I wrote the words down in a notebook Henry once used to track grocery lists. Now it became my ledger of manipulation. Every call, every comment, every not-so-subtle push, I recorded it all. But things escalated faster than I expected. One chilly Thursday evening, I returned from my painting class at the community center to find Karen's SUV parked in my driveway. She was inside rearranging boxes from my garage. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She jumped, then forced a smile. "Oh, Margaret, don't be upset. Daniel thought it would be helpful if we started organizing things. To make moving easier when the time comes." "When the time comes," I repeated, my chest tightening. Karen placed a hand on my arm, as if soothing a child. "You'll thank us later. Downsizing is liberating." I pulled away. "Karen, this is my home. Please leave." Her smile cracked, revealing irritation underneath. "We're just trying to help. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That night, after she drove off, I sat on the porch swing Henry built years ago. The wood creaked under me, and I thought of all the memories stored in every corner of that house: birthday balloons taped to the banister, Henry's muddy boots by the back door, Emily's giggles echoing down the hall. And now they wanted to erase it all, reduce it to equity on a spreadsheet. The next week, they called a family meeting. Daniel said it was to talk things through, but I knew better. We gathered in their dining room, the long oak table polished to a mirror sheen. Karen had printed handouts, actual handouts, detailing options for me. Retirement communities, senior condos, assisted living, each with price breakdowns and glossy photos of smiling elderly couples holding hands on manicured lawns. I stared at the paper, my jaw tight. "Mom," Daniel began in that rehearsed tone he used at work presentations, We just want what's best for you. This house, your finances, it's a lot to manage alone. We can help. Help! The word tasted bitter. And besides, Karen added smoothly, think of how wonderful it would be for Emily and James to raise their future children in your house. Keeping it in the family. I looked up sharply. In the family or in your name? The silence was thick. Daniel's jaw clenched, but he tried to keep his composure. Mom, don't be paranoid. We're offering solutions. You need to be realistic. Realistic, I echoed. That's one word for it. Ethan sat quietly at the far end of the table, his eyes darting between us. I could see the conflict on his face, torn between loyalty to his father and the truth he knew in his gut. When the meeting ended, I walked out without a word, but inside my resolve hardened. They thought they were closing in on me, tightening the net. What they didn't know was that every attempt, every slip of entitlement, was another stone stacked against them in Henry's codicil. A few nights later, Daniel came over unannounced. He paced my living room like a man who owned it. Mom, this can't go on. You've been irrational lately. Everyone sees it. Karen and I talked to an advisor. We think it's time we consider power of attorney. For your own good. The words hung in the air like smoke. Power of attorney, I repeated slowly. Yes, he said firmly. We're not trying to hurt you. But you're making unwise choices. You're vulnerable. I stared at my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep, the young man I had cheered for at his college graduation, and I barely recognized him. His eyes weren't filled with love or concern. They were calculating, cold. That night, after he left, I pulled the codicil from its envelope again. My hands no longer trembled. The humiliation that had once broken me now fueled me. Daniel and Karen thought they were closing the trap, but what they didn't realize was that the trap was theirs. I whispered to the empty room as if Henry could hear me. Not yet. Let them go further. Let them show their true selves. And for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. My 69th birthday should have been simple, a quiet dinner, maybe a store-bought cake with a few candles. But Daniel insisted on hosting something special at their house. You deserve it, Mom, he said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. I knew better. By then, every word from his mouth felt rehearsed. Every kindness had a shadow behind it. Still, I agreed, because deep down, I wanted to see just how far they'd go. The dining room shimmered with crystal glasses, a long, polished table set for 15. Relatives, neighbors, even a couple of Daniel's business associates were there. Karen floated around in a silk dress, smiling as if she were the star of the evening. Ethan sat at the far end tense, fiddling with his fork. Dinner went smoothly at first, roast chicken laughter, clinking glasses. I almost let myself believe it was just a family gathering. But then Daniel stood, cleared his throat, and tapped his wine glass. Everyone, he began, his voice carrying easily. We're so glad you could join us tonight to celebrate Mom. But beyond birthdays, we also need to think about the future. My mother has been, well, under a lot of strain, managing her affairs alone. Karen and I have been worried. So after consulting with an advisor, we've decided it's time to establish power of attorney. The words fell like stones into the room. Conversations froze. Forks hovered midair. My stomach clenched, but my face remained calm. This way, Daniel continued, we can protect Mom's finances, her home, her well-being. It's the responsible thing to do. Karen nodded eagerly. We all want what's best for Margaret. I think we can agree she deserves peace of mind without all the stress. I looked around the table. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided my gaze, unwilling to intervene. The humiliation was thick, just like at Emily's engagement party. But this time, I wasn't alone. From the doorway, a familiar voice spoke. Before anyone signs anything, there's something you all should hear. Every head turned. Mr. Blake Henry's old attorney stepped forward, his leather briefcase in hand. His presence was calm, but commanding, like a judge walking into court. Daniel frowned. "What are you doing here?" Blake met his eyes steadily. "I was invited. By your mother." A hush fell over the room. Ethan's shoulders relaxed slightly, and I caught the flicker of a smile cross his face. Blake set his briefcase on the table, unlatched it, and pulled out a sealed envelope. Henry Collins anticipated this very situation before he passed. He left a codicil to his will, an addendum that applies to anyone who humiliates or coerces Margaret. Daniel's face went pale. Karen's painted smile faltered. Blake unfolded the document and began to read, his voice deliberate, clear. "Any descendant who publicly humiliates my wife Margaret or attempts to force her from her home or control her finances shall forfeit all rights to their inheritance. Their portion will be redirected to Margaret and to any descendants who treat her with respect." The room was silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "This is outrageous," Karen snapped finally, her voice shrill. "Henry would never." "He did," Blake interrupted firmly. "And as executor, I've been keeping record. The engagement party name tag, the toast, the repeated attempts to push Margaret into a retirement home. And now tonight, this announcement about power of attorney. All of it qualifies." Daniel's face reddened, his fists clenching at his sides. "This is manipulation." "You're twisting his words." I stood slowly smoothing my dress. My voice was calm, steady. "No, Daniel. For years I've let you treat me like a bank. I gave and gave, hoping love was hidden behind your requests. But last night was the line. Tonight proves it. You didn't want to protect me, you wanted to control me." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "After everything we've done for you," I cut her off. "What you've done is humiliate me in front of family, in front of strangers." Henry saw it coming. And now so does everyone else. Gasps rippled through the guests. A cousin murmured, "Unbelievable!" Another shook her head in disgust. Ethan pushed back his chair, his voice steady though his hands shook. "Grandma deserves better than this. And frankly, Dad, so does this family." Daniel spun toward him. "Stay out of this." "No," Ethan said firmly. "I won't stay out anymore." For a moment, father and son locked eyes, rage against quiet defiance. Then Daniel turned back to me, his voice rising. "You can't do this. You can't just cut us off." I met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't cut you off, Daniel. You did that yourself." Blake closed the folder with a snap. Effective immediately, Daniel and Karen are disinherited. Their share will be divided between Margaret and the remaining respectful heirs, which from what I've seen includes Ethan. A stunned silence. Then whispers. Karen's face drained of color. Daniel's jaw worked furiously, but no words came. I turned to the guests, my voice steady. "I am not ashamed anymore. I am not just the lady covering the bills. I am Margaret Collins, and from this day forward, I will no longer be treated as less." The room erupted not with applause, but with a hush of respect. People averted their eyes from Daniel and Karen. The balance of power had shifted permanently. Karen grabbed her purse, muttering, "This isn't over." She stormed out, heels clicking against the hardwood. Daniel followed his shoulders, tense, his face ashen. When the door slammed behind them, I sank back into my chair. For the first time in years, I felt light. The humiliation that had once crushed me was gone, replaced by something else, liberation. Ethan leaned toward me, his eyes shining. "Grandma, you did it." I smiled faintly. "No, Ethan, they did it to themselves. I just finally let the truth speak." The house felt strangely quiet after Daniel and Karen stormed out. The air they left behind was thick with whispers, the clink of silverware abandoned mid-meal. Guests shifted in their chairs, unsure if they should stay or go. I looked around the room, my hands resting calmly on the tablecloth. For once, I wasn't trembling. For once, the weight of humiliation wasn't crushing me. Mr. Blake cleared his throat, his voice steady. I think that concludes our business for the evening. He snapped his briefcase shut, the sound final like a judge's gavel. Slowly, relatives began excusing themselves, some pausing to squeeze my hand, others whispering good for you as they passed. A few avoided eye contact, embarrassed to have laughed along at Daniel and Karen's jokes in the past. Soon, it was just me, Ethan, and a half-eaten birthday cake. Grandma, he said softly, I'm sorry it came to this, but I'm proud of you. I reached over and touched his hand. I should have stood up sooner. But I suppose it's never too late to remind people who you are. That night, I slept deeply. No nightmares, no voices of mockery chasing me. But the storm wasn't over. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was Karen. Her voice, usually honeyed, was sharp and bitter. You think you won last night? You humiliated us in front of the entire family. I didn't humiliate you, Karen. You did that yourselves. She hissed something under her breath before hanging up. Daniel called later, his voice shaking with rage. Mom, you can't just cut us off. This is our inheritance. Dad would never. Dad already decided, Daniel, I interrupted. And you proved him right. There was a pause, then a slam of the receiver. For weeks, they tried everything, angry voicemails, guilt trips, even letters claiming I was being manipulated by Blake and Ethan. They showed up at my house once, pounding on the door until the neighbors threatened to call the police. After that, the visits stopped, but the damage to their reputation lingered. Word spread quickly through our community. People who had once admired Daniel's successful family man image now shook their heads, whispering about greed and entitlement. Karen's friends pulled away. Invitations dried up. Meanwhile, Ethan flourished. He started drafting plans for the bookstore cafe he'd always dreamed of. One evening, he spread the blueprints across my dining table, his eyes shining with excitement. Grandma, with your help, I think I can really do this. A place where people come not just for books, but for community. Coffee poetry nights, story hours for kids. I studied the sketches, my heart swelling. Henry would be so proud of you. I said, my throat tight. Unlike Daniel, Ethan never once spoke of money as entitlement. He spoke of it as responsibility, as seed, not harvest. And for the first time in years, I felt like my family's future was in safe hands. Not everyone took the lesson so gracefully. Emily, my granddaughter, came by one afternoon, her face pale. She held her engagement ring nervously, twisting it around her finger. Grandma, I didn't speak up that night at the party. I should have. I just didn't want to upset anyone. I sighed, touched by her honesty. Silence can wound as deeply as words, Emily. But I believe in second chances. The question is, do you? She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I want to do better. That was enough for me. I wasn't looking for perfection, just truth. Months passed. Daniel and Karen filed paperwork threatening to contest the codicil. But Blake was ironclad. Every incident had been documented. Witnesses had been present. Their case collapsed before it even began. By the end of the year, they moved to another city far from the whispers and stares. Florida, I heard. They sent Christmas cards, still empty, glossy photos of beaches and palm trees, but they never called, and I never reached back. On the other hand, my life grew fuller. I painted more. I made friends at the community center. I even went on a weekend trip with a group of widows, laughing harder than I had in years. The real victory wasn't just the inheritance or the justice. It was the freedom, the knowledge that I no longer had to live as someone else's wallet, that I could define myself again. Nurse widow, painter, grandmother woman. Margaret Collins. Sometimes, late at night, I sat on the porch swing, the one Henry built. The wind rustled through the maples, and I swore I could feel his presence beside me. "You'd like Ethan," I whispered into the dark. "He's got your stubbornness, but he's got my heart." And for the first time since Henry passed, I didn't feel quite so alone. 1 year later, I stood in the doorway of a small brick building on a quiet street in Portland. Above me hung a new wooden sign, hand-carved by Ethan himself, the Lighthouse Cafe and Books. Inside, sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling across shelves lined with carefully chosen novels and memoirs. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and warm cinnamon rolls. A small group of college students laughed at a corner table, while a young mother read a picture book aloud to her toddler on a soft rug. I felt my chest tighten, not from sadness, but from pride. Ethan spotted me and waved his grin wide and boyish. "Grandma, you came just in time. First poetry night's about to start." I stepped inside my cane, tapping lightly against the floorboards. My heart swelled at the sight of what he had built. Not just a business, but a haven. A place where people could gather, share stories, and feel seen. I thought of Henry then, as I so often did. How he always dreamed of giving back to the community. How he believed money meant little unless it created something lasting. I imagined him standing here beside me, his arm around my shoulders, whispering, "We did it, Maggie." And in a way we had. Life had changed in so many quiet but powerful ways since that stormy birthday dinner. Daniel and Karen had faded from my daily life. They sent stiff holiday cards more out of duty than love. I didn't chase them. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation for how I lived or spent my time. Emily surprised me the most. After her initial silence at the engagement party, I expected distance. But she came back slowly but sincerely. She began visiting me on Sunday afternoons, sometimes alone, sometimes with her husband. She helped me tend my garden, and together, we planted tulips Henry once adored. One afternoon, with tears in her eyes, she admitted I was too afraid to stand up back then. "But you've taught me that silence is a choice too. I don't want to make that mistake again." We were rebuilding something fragile but real. And that was enough. As for me, I found joy in places I never thought to look. I enrolled in a watercolor class at the community center, my paint-stained hands a badge of freedom. I sold my first painting at a local art fair, and the buyer, a retired teacher, told me, "This reminds me of home." That single sentence healed parts of me money never could. I even traveled, something Henry and I had always talked about, but never done. A bus tour through California's wine country, a weekend in Seattle with old nursing friends, and most daring of all, a solo trip to Italy. Standing in front of the Colosseum, I whispered, "I made it, Henry." And for the first time in years, my grief didn't feel heavy. It felt like a companion walking beside me. But the greatest change wasn't in where I went or what I did. It was in how I saw myself. I was no longer just a widow, no longer just a mother or grandmother or the woman who signed checks when asked. I was Margaret Collins, a woman who had survived humiliation, betrayal, and loneliness, and found her strength again. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting Daniel and Karen off. If I regret losing the family dinners, the illusion of closeness. My answer is always the same. You can't lose what was never truly there. What I gained was far greater respect. Not from them, but from myself. One evening, sitting on the porch swing Henry built, Ethan joined me. The spring air smelled of lilacs, and the sun dipped low behind the hills. "Grandma," he said quietly, "do you ever feel lonely now?" I looked at him, his earnest face glowing in the fading light. "Not the way I used to. Loneliness isn't about being alone, Ethan. It's about being unseen. And I don't feel unseen anymore." He nodded, thoughtful, and together we rocked in silence, the creak of the swing steady and comforting. Looking back now, I realize the lesson isn't about money at all. It's about dignity, about remembering that you are more than what you provide. Families can love, but they can also take. And sometimes the bravest act of love is setting a boundary, even if it means some doors close forever. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: don't wait until you're humiliated to remember your worth. Don't let laughter at your expense silence your truth. Because at the end of the day, peace doesn't come from pleasing everyone. It comes from finally standing tall and saying, I am enough. I leaned back in the porch swing, the stars beginning to appear above. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt exactly that enough. Margaret's story is more than a tale of standing tall after years of being dismissed by her own family. It is a powerful reminder for all of us: a person's worth should never be measured by the money they give away. As we grow older, many of us are too often labeled as the provider or the one who pays for everything, and little by little, we can forget that we still carry our dignity, our wisdom, and our right to be respected. The lesson from Margaret is simple but profound. Have the courage to set boundaries even with those closest to you. True love never demands humiliation or exploitation, and sometimes love can only thrive when limits are clearly drawn. Self-respect is not selfish, it is the foundation for healthy relationships and for preserving peace of mind. If you find yourself at a stage of life where others tend to overlook or undervalue you, remember, it is time to live for yourself. Pursue the small joys, hold fast to the memories that matter, and give only when you truly wish to, not when you are pressured. And if this story resonates with you, I invite you to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Your words might just be the comfort someone else needs to hear. Wishing you a gentle evening filled with warmth and a quiet pride in the irreplaceable value of who you are.